Hello, and welcome to today's edition of Let's Talk. We're going to be talking about year 2 of implementation of our Code of Character, Conduct, and Support. And joining me today, I have our Director of Behavior Supports, Shannon Dobson. I have our Chief Officer of Student Services, Dr. Clinton Wilson, and I have our Area Superintendent for the South Area, Felicia Davis. So I'm really excited today to be talking again about our behavior, our Code of Character, Conduct, and Support. And we've had other episodes that focused on that, but those were earlier on. And today is going to be basically, where are we now? Last year was our first year of implementation of a full year. The year before that was really a planning year and a data gathering year and a bringing people to the table year. Last year was implementation, and now we're in year 2. So it's the perfect time to really catch everyone up on where are we right now. And so we're going to really focus in on what training is being implemented, where are we in basically in monitoring, and in what is our data telling us right now. So I'm really excited that I have 3 experts, 3 people living the work every day with us today. And so I'm going to start with the first question. Can one of you describe what does the training plan this year look like? What are our school teams, our teachers, our administrators, our student services staff? What is everyone receiving as far as training this year?
Okay, I can speak to the student services
Okay.
Component. This year we really wanted to get the voice of the whole district. And so with our student services code team, they're doing restorative interventions. And so last year we had our district leaders sort of lead the charge, but this year we've invited school staff to join that team. So we have school counselors on the team, we have graduation coaches, some psychs, social workers, and I'm really, really excited about having our APs. We have a couple of APs that are on our team. And so the result, the expectation is for those individuals to conduct the trainings with their peers. And I think it's really good because as a school counselor, if you see a school counselor training you on the code, you feel like it's someone that's working on the ground with you in the actual school building. And so the expectation is that our student services staff trains those individuals during our professional development, monthly professional development. So our counseling professional development, our psych professional development, our social worker professional development, nursing professional developments, graduation coaches, and then also our APs as well when they receive their professional development. So
And they're all receiving the restorative intervention
yes,
training?
restorative intervention training.
Awesome.
Yes.
Describe real quickly, what would be an example of an intervention they've drilled down on this school year?
So we have drilled down on a couple of things: reset,
Okay.
and then also re-entry. So if a student is suspended or they have a consequence, making sure that we are all around the table when they come back,
Okay.
and are supporting them with how we're going to reset, how we're going to do our re-entry, what are the supports that you need, so they don't come back to something that is the same. We want to make sure that it's different for them, that we're supporting them across the board.
That's great. And so an expectation there then, this, after all the training that our student services and others have had around restorative interventions, is that a student wouldn't just come back after some type of consequence and go right into a classroom.
No,
There should be that conversation.
No, there should be some type of intervention after the intervention
Okay.
to support them.
Perfect. Also, what other trainings? Anybody else want to comment on other trainings?
So specifically what's happening in our schools, so we have some, the beautiful thing about the code is that we're saying that we're looking at proactive and preventative support. So with our school-based teams, they have the expectation of having core behavior teams. And those teams undergo training about every other month in the preventative and proactive layers that our code promotes in terms of like meeting and greeting, like how you start your day with students. Are we calling students by names, whether it's, my first stopping you into this class period or my first step in with you for the day. And then also moving into like that classroom discipline and management piece, like depersonalizing and de-escalating, because we all know that schools are full of vibrations and there's going to be things that happen, and so how do I handle that, how do I respond in those moments is going to be critical for the teachers and all of the staff members in the building. So that's been one of the most instrumental pieces, is that really looking at our school-based staff, our teachers, our assistant teachers, and supporting them in learning those promotion and prevention strategies within the code.
That is so important. And so a lot of those are related to both behavior management and discipline and instruction. I know where all of that kind of works together. So with about 4,000 teachers, and that doesn't include like your TAs and others as well that are part of this training, but with the 4,000, it's explain that process from the training team to the school site. How are we really trying to get that across the whole system? Explain what that looks like.
Yes, so each school has selected a training, it's a core behavior team, or schools may call it something different, but that team then comes together about every other month, and they're with our district lead trainers for about 2 hours, where we are onboarding and kind of facilitating what we call the train the trainer model. So systematically going over that promotion prevention strategy, whether it addresses classroom instruction or discipline or classroom management. And then the expectation on those teams is to go back, really also co-create it, because every school has its own environment and its clientele, and then turnkey that training to all of their staff. And that happens sometimes in their staff meetings and after school sessions, in their smaller groups. So
That's good. So the behavior team, the core behavior team of each school is receiving the training. They're all receiving the training. They're given the resources. They go back to schools, and then they're doing that same training with the entire school staff. And where it can, and so you're saying what looks different based on the school's context is kind of when they do it. It might be an after-school meeting. It might be that they're doing it on an RS day, or a reserved for staff day. But at the end of the day, it's training team, turnkey the training, and then the next training, and that's been the cycle that we've been seeing. Okay, and that's awesome. That when I think about change process and the implementation of a district initiative across an entire system, that really is the only way to do it. It's by having a core group to train and then go out and deliver the training. So if I'm walking through schools now, which I love to do, and Felicia, I know you're doing that like all the time as an area superintendent, what can I expect to see? Just give me some practical, I walk into a classroom and a student is started the day off kind of maybe on the wrong foot and is struggling, and maybe says something inappropriate out loud, or maybe the teacher says something and the child responds in a not so positive manner. Like, what could I expect to see real life? And then Clinton, and that Shannon, if you would do that, and then Clinton, if I walked into a student services, a counselor's office, and they were involved in a conversation of like a reset or something, what would that sound like? So give me some practical things for our viewers that are watching this. What would that look like if I walked in a classroom?
Yeah, sure. So one of the most instrumental pieces within the development of our code has been the focus on depersonalization. So obviously, like I said, schools and classrooms are full of vibrations that happen throughout the day. And so if you have a moment where there is a student that is dysregulated, they're having a social and emotional experience, we've been working with the development of teachers first to depersonalize that. So you might see where I pause and I pivot, and I am regulating myself as the adult first, and then moving into that student and offering like a personal check-in. And so that could look like using some of our restorative conversations, so bringing in that restorative piece, like what's happening. So not moving away from why is this happening, but what's happening, and then how I can support you. So our classrooms also have, sometimes they call them peace places, or a calming area, which is also embedded in our charter code. So that also is an option to support them, and then continuous check-ins with them throughout that moment and that day.
That's awesome.
Very, very similar in the student services realm as well. Working with that student individually or in a group, or however they see fit, to see what is the best way to support them. I think it's all about supporting the student. I think that's what the code is all about. We're here for the students. They're our number one priority. And so making sure if there is a consequence that happens, talking about the consequence, working through the consequence. How can we better serve you? Who can better serve you in this capacity of school? And so with those check-in, check-out procedures, that was one of the restorative interventions that we used last year, that we learned about last year. You would ask a student who could better serve you, or who could better support you, who you could check in with. And it could be a cafeteria worker, it could be a custodial worker, it could be anyone in the school that student feels comfortable with. So making sure that we're drilling down, not just what we think, but what the student thinks. I think their voice is number one, and it's very, very important when it concerns their well-being, and then also making sure we're closing the loop. I think as student services staff or admin, it's our job to make sure that the parents are aware of what's going on. They are vital when it concerns student success. And I think a lot of times we leave them out of the conversation. And so closing the loop is ensuring that they're involved with what's going on, and then also getting their voice too. They know their students best.
Yes.
Could you just share, when you say student services, what does that look like in the school? Who are those people?
Sure.
In case people don't know.
A social worker, a counselor, a psychologist, a graduation coach, a school nurse, anyone that has been restoratively trained with our interventions to support our students across the board. But and then also closing that loop with the teacher. Sometimes we leave them out as what's going on.
Right.
And they're like, the student just came back to my classroom, and so what's going on? But letting them know and making them aware that there has been something that has taken place to support the students. So that's what it should look like.
And I think what Dr. Wilson just said is key. So when sometimes students do come back and teachers are like, why are they back? Again, depersonalization, right? So as we work on that skill and that strategy, that will help so that when a child does come back, that teacher has a clean slate for that child and can now accept that child back into the classroom.
Yeah, and relationships go a long way. I'm so glad you did mention the parent piece, because that's critical. And once you have parents working with you, it gets a lot easier from there, instead of them being either left out or only being called every time something goes wrong, but in a negative way, but really bringing them along with you. And so I'm excited about that. So that's, those are some things we can see when we walk in the classroom, and all of these things, and just the expectation setting. Here is what we expect with behavior. Here, all of this is part of just our core behavior plan, our core planning, and what we should see across every school, because we know that all of these prevention strategies will, and clear expectations for kids, because honestly, everyone likes clear expectations, routines, and structures, and so this is not. I hear people sometimes that think, oh, it's loosey goosey. No, it is not. It is very clear. What do we do when we walk in the door in our school, and so this is all part of Tier 1. As we think about students that may need additional supports in maybe Tier 2, going to Tier 2, and when Tier 1 is implemented really well, less kids will need Tier 2 and 3. But in the event they do, is that also part of the training, or is that coming next? Is that ongoing work? Describe a little bit about students that need even a little bit more support.
So I would say that is a part of our ongoing training, but it's also a part of our continuous improvement where we're integrating. We all know that our framework for school improvement is MTSS, and so it says that, how are we looking at across those tiers? How are we making sure that we're promoting and preventing? But when we look at what we've done with restorative interventions, and specifically like Dr. Wilson brought up with check-in, check-out, so if we have a particular group of students that don't seem to be responding to those the promotion and prevention strategies, there are trained student services staff, there are trained individuals in every building that can decide, maybe we do need to move this student to a more intensive intervention, such as check-in, check-out. So assigning someone to meet with them on a consistent basis 2 to 3 times a week. Also, kind of turning up the volume on those social and emotional supports. So whenever there's a need and we're seeing behavior, we also have to look into that as, there's a skill need as well. So is it that student's, struggling with impulse control, which leads to kind of self-management and self-awareness. And so how we directly instruct and support on that is also a large part of our integrated supports within the code, and also with our initiatives with SEL.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah.
Perfect. So we talked about a key factor in the success of our implementation. Sounds like it's this core behavior team at every school, because they seem to have a responsibility to train and then train others, to take training and train others. And it also sounds like, are they the ones that should be monitoring the school data, discussing what's going well, what needs to be addressed? Tell me more about the role of the behavior team. And after that, we're going to jump into what's some of the data we're seeing as a result of going into year 2. And Felicia, I'll bring you in on some of that as well.
Absolutely.
But talk first about the important role of this behavior team and how we're using that to really help us with the fidelity of our implementation.
Yeah, so the core behavior team really it's composed of like robust individuals. So you have your leadership, student services personnel, a teacher on that team. And ideally what we've set up for them is that they do come in and that they are looking at the total school-wide picture of data, what's happening school-wide from in our cafeteria to our hallways to specific, transition times and grade levels. And so they're using our educators handbook system to understand what are the trends in the school, what's happening, where do we need to calibrate, potentially dig in a little bit deeper to see, are we being consistent with our implementation? Are we meeting and greeting students at the door, as we said? And then they're to feed that information out to the school staff so that we're celebrating our small wins as a school, and then also feeding that information until their PLTs and teachers and that leadership team as well. So they have a major lift in terms of how the implementation is working within their school setting.
Yep. Anybody else want to add about the behavior team? Yeah,
I thought earlier when Shannon was talking about them actually turnkeying the training, it's great that they're the ones doing it because they're the ones actually now looking at the data and looking at the application piece of it. So
I mean, it really, honestly, for years there's been this focus on instructional leadership teams and people looking at your achievement data and your ongoing other data points and how are we doing instructionally, academically.
Right.
It is just as important to be monitoring this behavior piece. And so I think that team, and I know that we say like there's an expectation that they're meeting every other week, and I would be looking at it weekly, especially if you're a school that has a lot of incidents, so I'm thinking as our schools are implementing, that team needs to meet regularly. They need to have a regular way of work. And so I know part of, when you talk about next steps, I know the other day we were meeting about it and we talked about, do we need to give teams more protocols and more tools? And so we'll talk about what that might look like in a minute. So my next question is really now about monitoring. I know we've spent time talking about what we should expect with the training.
Right.
And we've talked about the role of the core behavior team, and all of that is critical to the success of this implementation. So I'm just wondering, when it comes to monitoring implementation, how are we monitoring? Are we looking at data, and what does that look like in action?
So the great thing about the Educator's Handbook is that it gives us very specific data. And so we're able to look at that at a district level, at an area level, at a school level, and then once within the school, we can disaggregate that data all different types of ways. Where are the infractions happening, right? Is it on the bus? Is it in the hallway? Is it a specific teacher's classroom? And then we can also look at data that tells us what the incidents are, right? So in one particular school, we have a lot of issues around inappropriate behavior or bullying or whatever those components are. We can really break down the data. And the great thing is that these core behavior teams are instrumental in that. So they are meeting, as you said, some schools every other week, some schools based on their data, they meet weekly. And as area superintendents, we are looking at that data. We look at that data weekly, and then we look at it with our schools as well, with our school principals on our coaching visits. Okay. And so some of the types of things that we're looking at, we are looking at the number of infractions and referrals and disciplinary actions, but mainly we're looking at what are the consequences, right? So what does our consequences look like? And the great thing that we're seeing is we're seeing less exclusionary consequences, right? So we are asking principals to look at the infractions, look at the code, see what those infractions really are, and do we really need to keep suspending kids, right, or putting them in ISS? We can now look at some other methods or some other consequences that keep our kids in school, right? So we're seeing an increase actually in the amount of, or the percentage of administrative conferences, right, versus ISS. We're seeing an increase in, dramatic increase in the 6 to 10 days, right, suspension, right? And a lot of that is because administrators now are trained in looking at the data and then treating each student as that individual student, right? Because we know that students come to us with trauma, right? And so just because they broke a rule does not mean, okay, this is your consequence. The code says this is a level 4, you're gonna go. We really need to look at each child individually. And when we have our coaching visits, we actually drill all the way down to the incidents. And so I can sit across from a principal and say, okay, you had 2 kids last week that were actually suspended out of school. Can you talk to me about those pieces? And now the principals actually consult us, right? So they will call area soups and say, listen, I had this happen. The code really says it's, a level 5, but I've got some, I can either mitigate it, mitigate down, aggravate it up. But I really want to look at this child because this child has got some trauma at home, and really we need for this child to be in the building. And we'll talk through what some appropriate consequences will be. We're not saying there aren't consequences. Of course there are consequences. But we really have to look at, and what the code is helping us do, is to look at really what's happening, why it's happening, how often is it happening. Many times it may go back to training. It may go back to depersonalization, right? It may go back to, when I look at the referrals, that core behavior team, along with the administrators, when I look at this data showing, you know what, my 4th grade teachers are struggling. They're struggling. Now, is that about classroom management? Is that about understanding the strategies? Are they not implementing the strategies? And so now I can provide support as a principal, as a building leader. I can provide support specifically for that group of teachers, right? Are we seeing that we've got a lot of incidents happening in the hallway, like at my middle school, right? There's a lot of incidents that are in the hallways. So let's look at our supervision, our duty coverage, right? Are our adults actually on duty when they're supposed to be on duty? So being able to look at that data, it just informs what we can do, just like with instruction, right? When we look at the academic data. So we are seeing really across the district, we're seeing a decrease in those exclusionary consequences. We've got some schools that are looking at alternatives to out-of-school suspension within their building, right? They're doing more mediation, they're doing more restorative circles, they're doing reset rooms, right? And so that's what we want to encourage. We want to continue to encourage those things. And I love that we can not only take it down to the school and teacher level, but the area superintendents in our weekly meeting. We're looking at it by area, and we're looking to see how can we get support. Do we need support from the behavior supports team? Do we need supports from our SEL coaches, right? How can we help support those schools? And we look at it again as a district, right? And in senior team and cabinet, we can look at those pieces. But there's so much information and so much power in the data. The data really tells us how to hone in on the areas that we need to and streamline our supports and interventions. And so it's really good that we have the data. I think last year we had a couple schools who weren't quite sure about Educator's Handbook, and we got training on that one. We're still working on some of the pieces, like making sure we're doing the right back in those pieces. But the data that we get from that platform just really helps us to make sure that we are implementing the code with fidelity, and it gives us information on how to streamline and where to go next.
Well, and just with any large-scale change effort, it's a 3 to 5 year process. We're in year 2. I think as we look at the data as a system, there are times I'm thinking, gosh, we've got to move faster. But the urgency is really critical in this. But I do think monitoring that data every week and making sure schools do that, and that goes again back to the behavior team. And doing exactly what you said, and thinking on the proactive side of this, because again, like the active supervision, all the things we've talked about in the training, that can prevent some behaviors. And then when behaviors still occur, And yes, there are consequences, and yes, there are high expectations, because I hear sometimes, oh, kids can do whatever they want. No, that's not true. None of us can do whatever we want. We got to be, we've got to have expectations set high, and then we rise to them. And I think that's an important part of the code, is that, nobody rises to low expectations.
Right.
Set the expectations high and have kids move toward them, and they will, with all the right pieces in place. And so I really want to know, kind of quickly, what are some wins? What are some celebratory points? Because I know we beat ourselves up a lot on, this is not going fast enough, this is not being implemented exactly, but people are working really hard, and I am sure there are some good celebratory points that we can highlight. Do you have any?
Yeah. So one thing that just really sticks out for me is I've been in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County for 21 years. All of my experience has been here. And this is the first time that district-wide that we have taken on an initiative to say, this is what we want to do systematically to respond to social and emotional behavior needs. So just within itself, pushing this forward and bringing all of the key players in schools together is a major win, because we're doing it systematically, we're doing it with intentionality behind it, we're making sure that we cover all of the pieces, from student services to our administrators, getting their professional development, to our teachers. And so that within itself is major. And then as of today, 88% of our students do not have a referral. And that's a large
That's
celebration,
great.
right?
That is a great
huge
celebration.
majority.
Yeah, and I think, we do get focused, because it is important to respond to data, and a lot of the data that we dive into does look at, suspension and some of those incidents that are happening, that we have to make sure, especially what we say to those core behavior teams, to celebrate the wins, like, narrate the positive, because there are great things happening. Along with Educator's Handbook, it also allows for teachers now to document merits.
Yes.
So when students are engaging in, they're showing that I am embodying respect, or whatever my core values specifically in that school are, we want to acknowledge that, because the more you acknowledge behavior, the more of that behavior, what you recognize, gets repeated. And so that for me, specifically, I think those are major wins within our district.
Yeah, for me, consistency is always key. And I think we have a consistent plan of interventions that we can utilize, that we can all name and call. I think for so long as educators, we do some of this stuff, but there wasn't a name to it, or was it consistent across the board? So we can see it at this school and that school, and I can call a counselor at another school and say, what are you doing? Well, make sure to utilize your interventions and things of that nature. You have a toolbox that you can use that's consistent across the board, going off of what Shannon was saying about the systemic change that we have in our district. And so it's very, very imperative, and it's very, very important that we have this here. And that is something that we can glean towards. So I feel a little more confident and more safe with that.
I'll tell you, I just love that the code has brought an awareness, right, to us, as far as looking at the disparity with exclusionary disciplinary consequences relative to our Black and brown students, right? And I think having those conversations with principals has been really invaluable. I mean, really, we are able to talk, and we're able to say, let's look at the child, right? And let's see really what's an appropriate consequence for the child, based on the code, of course. And I think having that conversation, that awareness, being able to now have those conversations, I really believe is beneficial for us.
So we've got some wins. We've got a lot of work to do. We are in the middle of year 2 of implementation across 81 schools, and working harder and more even toward consistency, and we'll be able to continue to celebrate wins. I think that we started this year a group of model schools, and we don't have time in this episode to really dig into that work, but these are our, is it 6 lab schools?
6, yep.
They're like lab schools, and so these are schools that are working to become model schools, and so that we can come back and talk more about what we're seeing there. We don't have time again in this segment, but we'll talk about that. But I do want to close out with one last question, because once those lab schools are like we can send other schools to learn from that. It's going to be incredible, and we're working toward that. These are schools that showed a ton of promise, which is why they were selected. And one other thing about all this is that, you know, work around behavior is hard. No one's going to say it's
Right.
easy. Teachers across the country, if you ask them what is one of their biggest challenges, it's around behavior. But it is the most important work we can do, because it's going to set us up for a better future. Zero tolerance policies of the past did not set us up for the future, and that's part of the reason we're here today in this boat. So I think that we've got to get to the point of high expectations. Yes, there are consequences for really negative behavior, but we are working on the preventative side really, really strong. So my last in closing, what are our next big moves to support a really effective implementation so we get to those results that we want, and that our educators in our schools feel supported and are seeing the success as a result of the code? What are some next steps?
So, as you mentioned, with our model schools, and they're acting as that practicing laboratory, one of our major next steps is that we are in the process of drafting out an implementation tool that allows us to, not just us, but administrators and teachers to kind of inspect like those practices for promotion and prevention and how they're showing up in our schools. And so that is a major piece of the work that we're continually to improve, but then also making sure that we're integrating this into a seamless language, because I think we said earlier, like, we are restorative in nature,
Yes.
and our code embodies that, and it also embodies our work around social emotional learning and MTSS, but helping schools to bring all of these pieces together so it doesn't feel like a silo, like everything is on an island, and that we are running into initiative fatigue. And so as a district team, we're coming together and looking at how do we make that seamless so that schools are able to run that very efficiently with and seamlessly.
Yeah, that's good. So we've got a lot of work ahead, and so as we wrap up this episode, I will say that I think we're coming back again for another, because again, we did one last school year where we were talking about the code. We've talked again also about mental health supports, SEL supports, which it all comes together. It's all part of our goal 5 of our strategic plan, which is creating a safe environment, safe and inclusive environment for our students. And so we will be back, and when we come back, again, I'd like to come back maybe in the spring, and maybe we can bring in a teacher, a model, maybe the principal, a teacher, and another person from our model
Absolutely.
schools
That'd be good.
to talk
That'd be
about
great.
this
That'd be
and
great.
what are they feeling. So again, we're coming back. There's going to be another episode of code implementation. We'll do that this spring. And this is a 3 to 5 year major change initiative that we plan to sustain for the long haul. And I can't wait till we are really celebrating the successes. And that will be not only successes in the data, but where our kids feel a sense of belonging, our educators feel supported, and we're going to get there. So I really thank you guys. I know this is hard work every day, and I appreciate your leadership. And stay tuned. We'll be back, another episode of our code implementation. Thank you.